All right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. We're talking about the budget 2025-2026, a 4.2 trillion shilling budget, 876 billion deficit. We're talking about managing expenditure and increasing revenue. That's a conversation we're having. My guests are still with me here. Tobias Alando, CEO, Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Thanks for making time. Liban Guyo is the Director, NCIC and Governance and Development Expert. Asante for making time. Neema Lois Wango is a Program Support at Budgetary Hub. Asante sana for making time. And CPA Robert Maina is also an Associate Director, EY, which is Ernst & Young, and also a member of ISPAC. Thank you for making time. Before we took a break, we were talking about taxes and how to broaden the tax base. And yesterday we spoke to the CS Treasury, John Mbadi, and this is what he had to say when it comes to tax remittance. Listen.
Lazima tulipe ushuru. Hapo tusidanganyane. Lazima watu walipe ushuru. A country cannot be run without paying taxes. We must pay taxes to be able to run our country. And for you to pay taxes, Kenya Revenue Authority must be given capacity to collect that tax. Watu wengi tukipewa nafasi hata hapa Mbadi ambaye ana earn pesa vizuri ama salary vizuri, I earn better salaries probably than many of us. But if you give me choice, if today just test me, that money that I'm earning, test me. Government of Kenya fails to deduct, pay as you earn. You give me that money, it goes into my account, and then you ask me now to return it. I will return probably 50-60%. Nitakuambia hii ingine nitalipa next week. People love convenience, and especially where money is involved. We love convenience. And if you just let people, Kenyans, to pay taxes at will without being followed up, look at yourself. I'm sure many of you here are also landlords in small ways. Mukona manyumba hapa na pale. Without even responding to me, how many of you are paying taxes out of those rental income? Because no one knows that you are collecting that money. Hutalipa ushuru.
Does he have a concern that somehow KRA has to be facilitated to keep track on people's income? It's the only way then you broaden the tax base. Is that a valid concern? That Kenyans will not outrightly just declare how much income they have, especially from their side hustles here and there?
I mean, the reality is, on the ground, there's an element of truth to that, and I'm happy that Bwana Mbadi is also an accountant, so he must have done a bit of accounting before he became the CEO.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the truth is, yes, there are people who deliberately do not want to declare the income. And the reason why, for instance, those who are in employment pay taxes because, it's deducted before it gets into your bank account. But, when you have that additional income that you're getting from businesses, side hustles and all that, maybe the question in many people's mind is, for instance, for those in employment, you find that in this economy, you have a huge proportion of those people supporting people in the rural areas, their parents, other dependents, who are not having incomes. So if someone is generating income from other sources, and that income is actually being used to pay for school fees, for their sisters, their brothers, and other people, or their ailing parents, because the hospitals actually not providing the medicine and all that. So that is the decision that person has to really decide, that do I declare this and pay the taxes? And if I pay these taxes, will my parent pay the medication they need when they actually go to a hospital? So when you leave those people with those kind of decisions, that's when they will sway towards not actually declaring that income. So if we actually solve the fundamental issues, and I think in an economy, the fundamental issues is healthcare. Basically, everyone wants to access that at a very affordable rate. Education, can I access it at a very good level? Basic things. So if people are able to take care of the very basic things, I can see the roads are being constructed, then the perception, I really don't need to keep any extra money because in any case, the needs that I'm taking care of using this income have actually been taken care of by the government. So I agree there's an element that people are not willing to do that, but I think we have to look at them from both ways as well. That yes, we need also to look at the other side so that people are also then willing to pay this income.
Okay. Lois, Budgetary have had some concerns and pain points on this budget. What are your concerns as Budgetary have?
Yeah, so one of the concerns maybe that I can truly highlight is when we speak about trust, and oftentimes we like to look at service delivery as Budgetary Hub to make sense of the numbers for citizens to understand service delivery. Now, even as we speak about tax and why people are not feeling motivated to pay taxes, and maybe I can give a perspective of the youth. So the youth are coming up into, the space, they're starting to get employed, and a majority of them have a lot of resistance to anything the government is doing, whether it might be good, whether it might be bad, the issue of trust again. And a majority of us are getting into the informal sector, especially because there's not a lot of employment opportunities for us. And then again, that's where we're having a big gap when it comes to taxation. Now, when it comes to the issue of trust, something I would really highlight when it comes to us as Budgetary Hub is tightening the loopholes. So when we tighten the loopholes, we're able to better service delivery. Let me give a really good example of what is happening in the education sector. There's a lot of fragmentation in the education sector, especially when it comes to bursaries and scholarships. So we did a research at Budgetary Hub and we found that at least 61% of bursaries and scholarships as of 2023-2024 are outside the education sector. And that is something really notable because from another research that was done by Usawa Agenda, at least 8 in every 100 students are not in school because of lack of school fees. So what this means, when we look at 1.13 million learners out of school because of lack of school fees, and yet we have 61% of bursaries and scholarships outside the education sector. We have bursaries in so many government offices. MCAs have bursaries and scholarships, women reps, NGCDF. There's so much fragmentation, and yet children are out of school because of lack of school fees. So restoring trust is seeing measures such as consolidating such funds to ensure that these students are not out of school. Then maybe when we see that, we are restoring trust in the people to see that even with what we have now, we are making an effort to make sure that we are tightening the loopholes and using the money we have for service delivery.
So this money, you're saying that 61% of it is outside the system. It is then used for more of political expediency rather than what it was meant to do.
Yes, because then tracking becomes very hard. Maintaining accountability for this money becomes very hard when it is all over the place.
But it comes back to what Tobias was raising. Does responsibility come before accountability, or is it accountability before responsibility?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the government will have to collect revenue.
Yeah.
So they do have the responsibility to collect revenue. Then they owe it for the social, I think you called it the social contract.
Contracts.
Then they owe it to the people to deliver services. And for us as citizens, we do have the responsibility to pay taxes, and at the same time we have the responsibility to keep government accountable as well for how they're using our taxes. So it does work both ways.
Liban, how can this budgeting system be made more inclusive so that some people don't feel like we are too oppressed and others don't feel like I have to find a way of evading this taxation?
There is a saying that there is no taxation without representation. So, for example, the legislators, the members of the parliament, they are the ones who pass all these laws. To what extent do they pay tax? I get tax on almost all the allowances, including the money that I'm given, for airtime. It's put on my payslip. Everything is taxed.
Yeah.
And the people who demand for all Kenyans to be taxed, and they have the audacity, to make a lot of noise from the floor of the parliament. To what extent do they get taxed? I'm told it's on the first 400, 200, but the truth of the matter is, you see, they don't pay tax, especially on the mileage, and that is where they hide a lot of their money. So it's leading by example. It's leading by example. If our leaders, particularly the political leaders, lead by example and pay the tax, Kenyans will follow suit. Then the other way is also, tax is also a very complex and burdensome and very bureaucratic system. So the KRA should also make it easier for Kenyans. It should not be too complicated. Like, for example, the SMEs, you want to pay tax and, you consume a lot of time, waste a lot of time and all that. So I think there should be tax reform so that it becomes very easy for individuals and also for the business to be able to file their taxes.
Okay.
There are again a lot of also overlapping taxes and levies. That's why some Kenyans want to also evade paying the tax. Because you are taxed here, you are taxed here. So you look for a way of cutting corners.
Okay.
So I think there should be transparency and also accountability. Yes,
Okay.
and the legislators should concentrate more on oversighting the government, because at the end of the day, they oversight and they check on how the money has been used.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tobias, there's something I wanted to explain to Kenyans, and it's been a big conversation. Treasury CS Mbadi confirmed that yes, in the finance bill, there are certain goods that have been moved from tax exempt to zero rating. But he also said, and I want to play that soundbite from the CS, saying that there'll be no increase in taxes. This time, there's no increase in taxes whatsoever, except there's some goods that have been moved from tax exempt, which means the manufacturer can claim input tax, move to zero rating, which means the manufacturer cannot claim input tax, but they're still zero rated. Where is the problem here? But first, let's listen to what the CS said in terms of taxing, that there won't be any increase in taxes.
Mahali tumefika, hatuwezi kutosha uzuru zaidi kwa Wakenya, especially kwa ile tunaita personal tax. Ile ushuru inalipwa moja kwa moja kutoka kwa wananchi wa kawaida. Na hiyo ndiye msimamo wangu, na imekuwa msimamo wangu kwa muda mrefu sana. Mnajua mimi kwa masomo yangu nimesomea maneno ya accounting, ama ukipenda ni uhasibu. Na kwa hiyo masomo tulifundishwa kwamba kuna mahali unafika ukiendelea kutosha ushuru, sasa badala ya kupata pesa zaidi itaanza kupungua, kwa sababu wananchi wanafanya biashara ili wao pia wafaidike. Huwezi kutosha ushuru kupita kiasi. Kwa hivyo ukiangalia hii bill tumepeleka bunge, tulipeleka hii bill bunge tarehe 30th April. Hii bill tunaita finance bill. Ukiangalia vizuri, for the first time hatujaweka ile nyongeza ya ushuru vile inakuwa ukiangalia vile tulikuwa tunafanya mbeleni hapo awali. Kwa mfano, hakuna mwaka tumepeleka finance bill without sin tax. Hiyo ndiyo mfano moja naweza toa. For the first time hatujaongeza ushuru kwa hizo bidhaa tumeweka kwa basket tunaita thin products kama pombe, sigara na vitu kama hizo. Tunaona ni kama tumetosha ushuru ya kutosha.
Tobias, is that true that there'll be no taxes this time, when we know in the finance bill there are certain goods that have been moved from tax exempt to zero rating?
So ideally, what he says is true, but logically, what has happened is actually it's moving goods from zero rate to tax exempt. It's not the other way around. The bill proposes moving certain goods from zero rate to tax exempt. If you move a good from zero rate, you claim VAT. Because it's at zero, you pay VAT 16%, then you claim. At tax exempt, you don't pay VAT, 16% VAT, as you buy the product. However, from the manufacturer's perspective, any good that is at tax exempt, there is what we call input VAT that the manufacturer will pay. And if I'm going to produce this product and pay input VAT under tax exempt, I'm not able to claim VAT refund. That means that 16% input VAT is a cost borne by the manufacturer. So that means I'll have to transfer that cost to the final cost of the product, making my product expensive. The argument is or that cost sometimes, or that benefit is not transferred to the consumer, is neither here and there, because we are living in a competitive environment. I'll have to make my cost very, very competitive. Otherwise, the same product can be imported, or someone else can sell it at a cheaper price. So moving our goods from zero rate to exempt and not allowing us to claim input is not an advantage from the manufacturer's point of view.
Because you're right what you're saying, that because Treasury CS said that claiming of the input tax, the advantage was never really passed to the consumer. This is only an advantage for the manufacturer.
That is how...
In fact, it says most of it has been abused. Some of them claim even on goods that were never really manufactured.
So
you use the bread aspect, saying that those who are claiming it are not really the bakers themselves, and then it doesn't transfer to the...
So that is the issue around zero rate, where he's saying that some people are not really transferring the benefits to the consumer. However, we can't blame everyone for a mistake of a few people. If there is an administrative concern around VAT refunds, then that needs to be dealt with separately. Because we are living in a world where whatever we do here is also done somewhere. South Africa still has zero rate, and they process their VAT refunds within 30 days. So they have addressed those administrative challenges. They have blocked those loopholes that people may claim fictitious VAT refund. However, the rest of the manufacturers should not suffer because of 1 or 2 or 3 bad apples. It's just that let's work towards making our system foolproof and accountable in a way that people pay what is due to them and claim what is due to them.
Okay. Yes, Robert.
Just to add a comment on that, because that's an interesting topic. Now, there has been a lot of outcry that our tax expenditure is very high. And basically, tax expenditure we refer to the tax foregone. So if I give you an incentive, I ask you to pay X amount instead of paying the normal tax rate, that we consider that to be tax expenditure because the government has foregone that tax. Now, this discussion in 2013, because that's when we got the current VAT Act after the repeal of the previous one. If you review the first and the second schedule that came in place there, they were very neat. They were very minimal in terms of the goods. The first schedule refers to the goods that are, the first and the second schedule deals with the goods that are either zero-rated or exempt.
Exempt, yeah.
Now, the schedule that came in with the Act then was very, had very minimal goods. Over the years, what we've done is that we've added many, many goods and services into either exemption or zero rating. Now, what the government has not done, and I think this is where would be my concern, is that if you are, for instance, giving an incentive, a specific industry incentive, let's say you zero rate people who are constructing, let's say, hospitals to take care of certain needs. From the word go, there should be a clear sunset date. Like you say, we are giving you zero rating if you construct a hospital with this number of beds. This incentive will be there for the next 5 years because it's probably aligned with the government's objective to achieve a certain milestone within healthcare. After the 5 years, I as an investor, I'm very much aware that as I do my planning, I will get to the normal tax rates. But the issue of coming in one day, you just wake up and the government has decided this thing was zero rated, now it's exempt. That's the issue. We need to have some clear dates. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and that's where the concern is.
Absolutely,
okay.
Yes.
And let me bring in Lois on this. Lois, have we reached that point where it's called the Laffer curve, based on the economists, where now taxation, if you increase taxation, it's inversely related to now the revenue collection? You tax people so much that if you increase it now, you end up making less revenue. Is that the point where we are at as the budgetary hub conversation?
Well,
Kenyans cannot bear any more taxes at this point. But then we can see that from what Tobias and Robert is saying, it seems that there are still some taxes that are going to come through the back door. Yeah.
Well, I think I would agree with that, and I think it's one of the things that the CS mentioned as well, is that even when you look at the graph, it reaches a point where you plateau. So we're speaking about trying to increase taxation, but then employers are being hurt. They are not opening more opportunities for employment. People are not being employed. So then, of course, the taxation there is not increasing, it's plateauing. We're talking about more people getting into the informal sector, and the measures of collecting tax in the informal sector are not tightened up. Then we're not collecting more tax on that end. So I believe, yes, we are plateauing, and then that is a conversation of having on where we need to think of other options for us to bring in more tax that is not going against the constitutional rights of citizens and breaching privacy of businesses and people that are working on a daily basis. So to look at the options that are on the table. So again, going back to tightening the loopholes, controlling our expenditure, do we need to reprioritize some of the things that can be done on a later date? Do we have to look at things that we can postpone in doing when it comes to the budget? There are things that depend on taxation, such as healthcare, education, that what we're seeing in the budget is this very critical social services are being crippled, and a lot of cuts are happening. And that is the question of, if we're not attaining our targets when it comes to taxation, then you need to look at the options that are on the table where we are prioritizing on the very critical social services, and then reprioritizing things that we can do later or reduce expenditure on.
Yeah. Speaking of priorities, and Liban, you also mentioned the issue of priorities. Let me bring in what Treasury CS Mbadi had to say in terms of where they're focusing in terms of priorities for this particular budget. This is a conversation we had yesterday here, and he's been having a conversation with quite a number of people talking about the priority areas, the debts, how you're going to finance the deficit. Listen to what he had to say in terms of priorities.
Ukiangalia maintenance of roads, tumeongeza pesa kutoka bilioni 85 billion kwa hii bajeti ya mwaka huu ile inaisha to 115 billion in the next budget. Sasa hiyo inamaanisha we are going to spend 30 billion more to maintain our roads, because the biggest problem is not even constructing new roads. It is maintaining the roads that exist. Ninataka tena kusema tumeweka pesa ya kusaidia mpangilio ya serikali zingine muhimu kama afya, health. Sana sana unajua watu walikuwa wanapiga kelele sana, na walikuwa na sababu. SHA haikuwa inafanya kazi vile inatakikana ifanye, na sababu ya SHA kukosa kufanya kazi vizuri ili kutokana na ukosefu ya pesa ama fedha tulikuwa tumewekea SHA, na sana sana kwa ile tunaita primary health care. Primary health care ndiyo inagharamia outpatient treatment ya wananchi, na hiyo inasaidia mwananchi wa kawaida. Na tumeongeza bajeti ya kuenda kwa primary health care kutoka bilioni 7.1 to mpaka bilioni 13.1, 13.1 billion up from 7.1. Hiyo ni karibu double, na hiyo inamaanisha 2025-2026 nyinyi mtapata matibabu kushinda ile mlikuwa mnapata kwa mwaka iliyopita.
Liban, are those the right areas of focus? Because you also mentioned another area of priority as security. So he's mentioned security, roads, and health.
Yes.
Are you satisfied with that?
Yes. Those are key areas. Issues of security is very key. Roads, very key. Education, very key. Did you mention education?
You mentioned health. Yeah.
Health.
The health is there. Those are very key. And these are the key concerns of the ordinary Kenyans. But to what extent is that statement very true? Because yes, it has increased. For example, the budget for education in certain sectors within the education. But then again, education is still underfunded. It's still underfunded. You've seen there is a lot of hue and cry on, for example, like decapitations, you know, for even high schools and for the universities. They are not receiving money in good time. Okay. For primary schools, for primary education, which is usually almost free, and now the parents are, sharing the burden at 50%. And we pay like 1,420 per child. So if the current situation persists, parents may even pay more. Issues of the maternal health and creative services. I think there is a budget reduction also on that. Okay, and we pride ourselves for coming up with the universal health care. But still, you see, there's a lot of complaints around that. It's a new thing that we're experimenting with. So obviously, there will be a bit of hiccups here and there. But it's my sincere hope and utmost expectation that it will work. We've done very well in terms of investing in roads, particularly in the rural areas and areas that has been previously marginalized and detached from the rest of the country. We've heavily invested in opening up northern Kenya, now particularly, to connect us to the Somali markets, Djibouti market, and the Ethiopian market. So investment in roads is very key. Is very key in terms of lowering the cost of productions and for local manufacturers or even farmers getting their goods to the market early enough. So I think in terms of priorities, we've got it right, but still underfunded.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And let me bring in Tobias on this. Tobias, there's something I want us to talk about now, and I'd like to hear all your views about it. The 876 billion budget deficit, we know now more than 2/3 of it will be borrowed locally. That's about 592 billion. The other 284 billion will be borrowed externally. Before we even get into what that means, how much of an impact will that have on local manufacturers? Because it's a catch-22 situation. Government has been told, avoid expensive loans.
Correct.
But if they borrow locally, then they crowd out the manufacturer.
Yes.
So how do you draw the balance?
Very, very interesting. And budget deficits are normally a worry because you tend to now look at the existing group to tax. Manufacturers is just one of those groups. Like I mentioned in my opening statement, that we need to identify modalities to spur certain sectors that will ultimately end up generating more revenue. Service sector, agriculture, tourism, and manufacturing. From where I sit, if you look at the economic survey of 2025, manufacturing sector contributes about 18% of the revenue, which is about 360 billion. So out of this 4.2 trillion, manufacturing sector definitely has its own contribution. This is a baby or a cow that gives you milk. What needs to happen is, through the budget, and what we are seeking to see, is incentivize this sector. Reduce a lot of burdensome taxes within the sector that can enable the sector to grow and create more jobs. In 2008, we did have a conversation and a meeting with the president, and the conversation was around moving our GDP contribution from 7.5 to 2020. To 20% by 2030.
By 2030, yes.
Yes, so that's an ambitious plan. And through doing that, we were going to raise about 1 trillion shillings in terms of revenue by 2030. And we identified key sectors that really need to be supported, like, for example, leather value chain. Leather is one of the biggest sector, textile, another big sector, horticulture, that needs, and steel, that needs to be incentivized so that they can grow and create more jobs. The target also was to create about 1 million jobs. We are currently employing about 369,000 people directly. So you see, manufacturing as a sector already gives an opportunity through the budget to see what can we do to incentivize manufacturing for it to grow further, because there is opportunity around the growth of the manufacturing sector. We are competing. If you look at our GDP contribution, we have dropped from 7.5 in 2023 now to, I think, 7.3 in 2024. We have dropped our GDP contribution. And we need to really identify what are these factors that inhibit the growth of the manufacturing sector. Look at all the big economies in the world. Look at India. India has become a big economy because of manufacturing, same as China. Go to Africa, South Africa and Egypt, Algeria, a bigger economy because of the manufacturing sector. So the only way our GDP as a country will grow is by incentivizing manufacturing, not taxing manufacturing. Incentivizing manufacturing. And if you incentivize manufacturing, now to your question, this debt, the deficit that we have will be met because many industries will grow, many employment will be created, and taxes will be paid.
No, so this deficit is what will grow if you incentivize manufacturing. That's
Correct.
an interesting approach there. But now this approach...
the deficit will reduce because the manufacturing will grow, will be able to pay more revenue to government.
But at this particular point, this is where they are, that 592 billion will be borrowed locally. Is that a good move or not? Because where do you do the balance when you go internationally? It becomes
to your point,
expensive.
It's not a good move because now people will take the money to government rather than invest it in, for example, manufacturing.
Okay.
So priorities never are invest in the manufacturing sector. Priorities are buy treasury bills and bonds. I get my 18%. We're all looking for quick wins or quick investment. But we are not looking at long-term investment like in manufacturing that would translate into employment and longevity. We are not looking at that.
But if they go international, then the loans are even more expensive.
Definitely.
So then what's the balance? That's what I'm trying to figure out. What balance is the best for them at this particular point?
For the balance now,
we are in.
Under the Credit Guarantee Fund, we need, and we've been pushing for additional allocation of funds under the Credit Guarantee Fund for manufacturers and SMEs and potential manufacturers to access loans at a single digit to set up small manufacturing firms. That is the only way we can spur manufacturing also. But if our focus is only on treasury bills and bonds, which is good, but we need to look at other activities that will ultimately generate income and employ our citizens.
Okay.
Yes.
Robert, what is the best way of bridging this deficit? I know there's an argument from Tobias that deficit itself should not be that big, but how do they bridge it, knowing that now it's 876 billion, they're intending to borrow 592 billion locally, 284 internationally. If they borrow more internationally, it's more expensive. If they borrow more locally, they crowd out the local manufacturers. So what's the best way of bridging that deficit?
Oh, well, it's certainly a very difficult position to be in because once you don't collect taxes or you don't have enough taxes, and then in an economy like Kenya, you know, Kenya, we are not fortunate to have things like oil, gas, those things that probably in some countries like Nigeria or the UAE, they will generate a lot of money from those kind of products, the natural resources. So Kenya being more of a service economy, our choices are very limited. So we either collect taxes or we go the route in terms of the debt. And that's what they are doing. Because I've seen there was an attempt, and this current financial year, we saw, for instance, the cabinet trying to reduce the number of parastatal state corporations. Our hope is that we would see some reductions in some of the allocations, the budgeted the expenditure that was going to these corporations. So unless we work on either reducing our budget in the first place or increasing our taxes, as a country, we will continue borrowing. And I think the issue is borrowing as bad as we might put it, not as bad. The issue is a quantum, whether we are actually taking too much debt, because, for instance, in the budget, we are saying 1.1 trillion will go to interest, not principal, interest payments. So if KRA collects 2.5 trillion, 1.1 goes to interest. So we only have an additional 1.4 trillion to go towards other needs. So the issue of laking in more debt, and I think the government might say at the moment the interest rate is going down, you know, it's below 10% for the T-bills and all that, so the cost may not be as high. But if we are not very careful, in the coming years, the interest will be so high that we will have very minimal to allocate towards development expenditure. So it's about a balancing act, ensuring that, yes, we can still continue borrowing because it happens across the world, but then we manage the quantum of the money we borrow. And that can only happen if we work on our expenditure by making sure there's efficiency so that we reduce that as we try to push in terms of increased tax collections.
Yeah. Earlier on, you spoke of a zero-based budgeting.
Yeah.
What would that look like?
Okay, thank you. So this is something the government has been working on. And this scenario would be instead of what we do have at the moment, because what we have at the moment is a case of we will give the MDAs, the ministries, the departments and all that. Most of them will work towards looking at what did they budget last year. And they look at some incrementals, they need to increase here, they need to work on this. Zero-based budgeting would work in a case where they will start from scratch. Meaning, if we are talking of, let's say, the Ministry of Agriculture, they'll start with, we have a project, let's say, in terms of supporting farmers, maybe with their fertilizers. How much is expected from this? That amount is set aside. We also want to offer, let's say, extension services. What's the cost of these services? Then the same is put. And then you attribute that cost to the value that is going to be achieved by the component, not just having an amount based on what you had last year and working on incremental. Zero-based starts from zero, you work upwards, and you need to support every expenditure, and you attribute value, the value that is going to be derived from that. So that's the whole concept of the zero-based budgeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lois, what is the best way of dealing with this deficit?
I think important for me to mention just before I say about that is to bring in the perspective that when we're talking about an 876 billion deficit and an outstanding debt of over 11 trillion, that means, as Robert has said, about 63 shillings is going to just paying our debt. And then we're remaining with about 37 shillings. Now, when you take a look at removing other consolidated expenses like payment to constitutional offices, let's say pensions, let's say we add a portion of the pending bills, etc., already we are remaining with a very small amount to allocate to, for example, social sectors. And just to bring in the perspective that what this social deficit means for service delivery is what we're seeing in the budget of 2025-2026 is there's a lot of very sudden, unexplained movements in allocations to social to social sectors. A good example, and actually something that I'm just seeing in the nation today, is one of the winners that has been mentioned is basic education, 5.9 billion in allocation to examination and administration. And this is a conversation that was really, being had in the course of the period, where we are seeing that allocation to examination has been reduced to about 1 billion, a majority of which was actually appropriations in aid. Now we are seeing that amount has been brought back. Now, to give a perspective on what debt actually does to service delivery when this happens, and that's why it's very important for us to actually look at options to which we can reduce the amount of that per 100 shillings that is actually going to debt, is that we have a very small amount that is actually left to be allocated to social sectors. So now we have a lot of competing priorities. This 5.9 billion that has been reallocated to examination looks like a win. But then when you look at the budget lines down in education and where this 5.9 billion has come from, it's actually been lifted just as it is from secondary education and primary education. So literally, we have cut 5 billion in recurrent allocation to secondary schools and 900 million from recurrent expenditure in primary schools. That is what it looks like. We literally don't have money for social sectors. So for us to fund this, we are directly cutting from this, which both of which are extremely important when it comes to basic education. So for us to understand that when we're speaking about a deficit, it has very adverse effect when it comes to prioritizing and funding our priorities. Okay.
Libana, how do we deal with this deficit in your view? I know you had mentioned that the priority areas of expenditure is where the problem is. That yes. You have mentioned the advisors who are taking in more money. So yes, we are here now. It's 76 billion deficit. How do we deal with it?
Yes, I will still repeat the widening the tax base to ensure that there are more people to be taxed. We also need to rationalize our public expenditure, because there's a lot of ghost workers, especially in the counties and even in the parastatals at the national level. So we have to rationalize our public expenditure. Also, a lot of fraud and a lot of wastage in procurement sector. I'm happy that the government have now making sure that we go e-procurement, which is something very nice and something very welcomed. Also, the issue of counterfeit goods in this country. I think the CEO KM will agree that it's something really big in this country, particularly in the pharmaceutical industries, automotives, you know, a lot of counterfeit goods. And because of this, the government is losing a lot of revenue to counterfeits. And not just revenue, it's also, you know, these counterfeit goods are substandard goods. When we talk about pharmaceutical industry and the medicine, it's even a risk, you know, it's a health risk. So if we, you know, seal that loophole of the counterfeit goods, in terms of the exercise duty that we lose towards that, how much are we likely to rope in?
On just to add on counterfeit,
Yes.
We've seen the trade on counterfeit increase by around 16 or 17%.
Yes.
And the government is losing approximately 102 billion.
Yes.
So that already shows you that's a sector that, in terms of budget deficit, the government needs to tighten its hand in regards to dealing with counterfeit. And counterfeit is not, it's a health hazard, one, to us. And in terms of job creation also, we are losing a lot of jobs. And it has a risk on loss of revenue for government. It is estimated, according to ACA, we have
Anti-Counterfeit Authority.
Anti-Counterfeit Authority, we have approximately a market of 726 billion for counterfeit. That alone is ready to fill the government's budget deficit by definition. I think we need to tighten our noose in regards to counterfeit, because that's a very big opportunity. And counterfeit worldwide, if you look at it, it's a huge market. Its GDP alone can fund the African continent and run the African continent and keep change. That shows you it's a market that we really, really need to address. For us to raise the deficit that we have.
And I'll be speaking to Jimmy Mbogo in just a bit. He's in Parliament. But yesterday, he was speaking to the Principal Secretary for Treasury, and that is Chris Kipto, and they talked about this budget being a better budget, bottom-up economic transformation agenda. But then we see that the central bank has consistently tried to lower the base lending rate. At a time, this is supposed to be an advantage to the private sector. But if the private sector itself is being crowded out, then does this lowering of the base lending rate just then be beneficial to the government rather than the private sector that it was intended to benefit?
So lowering the base lending rates would mean the interest rates are lower. And that would be advantage to the common mwananchi and anyone who is seeking funds.
But do they get those funds?
Now that's the other concern. And I think there's a conversation between the central bank right now and Kenya Bankers Association to address that middle gap concern in terms of transferring that benefit to the end consumer. So it's a good idea, but we need to have it addressed in terms of benefit from the lender's perspective and from the central bank perspective.